So I got a lot of material to kind of cover, so I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. Basically, we're going to talk about a deployment service I've created over the last few months or so. But before we started, I wanted to kind of throw out the 10 commandments of Access. If you've been around Access for a while, you've seen the Access website listing the 10 things you should do. I agree with most of them. Number 6 was thou shalt split thy database. And I'd like to think that maybe there's a 11th commandment, or maybe a commandment that is a 6b, which is, thou shalt deploy the front ends to thou's end user's computer, or something in a biblical kind of fashion. The reason we do this is obviously we have to be able to update the front end file when we push out new changes, but there's also some benefits that this will improve your performance. Now, back when I started, 10 megabit networks were kind of the thing for clients. Now it's gigabit, so you may not see that dramatic improvement, but basically putting all that stuff just eliminates some network traffic. It also can virtually eliminate corruption issues. If a user does corrupt their copy of the front end, there's a pretty good chance Access will fix it. If it can't, you can just go ahead and give them a new version. They're the only user that's affected. So that begs the question is, how do you efficiently do that? Well, off the top of my head, I came up with 5 things that I've done in the past, and some of those are the not too distant past. So you probably have different methods you're using. I'm guessing most of you have used something along the lines of this at one point or the other. So what is the appLauncher? Well, it's a service that deploys and launches Access applications to users anywhere in the world, assuming they have an internet connection. It is based on a tool I wrote 20 years ago that was VB6. It would talk to a local SQL server, and it was all managed by an Access front end. And this worked great. I actually had one user that I think that was deploying to 550-ish users using this tool. The problem was it was scattered across all over, different states and countries of clients I had. So pushing out a change and keeping things in sync was kind of a pain. Having this as a service solves all that problem and makes the setup very minimal. So this is a complete ground up rewrite. There isn't a single line of code that made it over, using kind of modern technologies and Azure as the primary backend service. If you've kind of followed innovations in the cloud, they talk about platform as a service, software as a service, infrastructure as a service. I like to think this is deployment as a service, which basically lets you focus on the innovation, things that are specific to your customer, not infrastructure. If you have 100 clients, you probably only have 2 or 3 different mechanisms that you really need to cover to push out changes to their front ends. So what I'm looking for is basically feedback, bugs, feature gaps. Are there use case scenarios that I haven't covered? And the bottom line is this something that you might use? So I mentioned it's on Azure, which is not free, so I'm going to have to charge for this at some stage. But the good news is it's completely free for now. I have no plans to monetize it anytime soon. I'm hoping I can keep it free for the rest of this year. The caveat would be if I start spending $1,000 a month in Azure spend, I probably will revisit that. But basically, I need the real world usage to validate that the pricing model that I've come up with makes sense. So it's still tentative, but I'm looking to make it super affordable, as in kind of the price of a cup of coffee or a pint of beer. And that's probably Seattle prices, maybe not London prices, but that would be per user per year. So trying to make it extremely affordable. To do that, I've come up with what I'm calling a token pricing model, which will make it scalable between 2 and 2,000 users. So another tenet of the kind of cloud computing is this pay as you go. So this allows me to scale and not have to worry about, you know, a user that's got 2 users a month and I'm billing them $1 or less, and I'm spending half or more of that just processing the payment. So you basically buy a block of tokens and you consume the tokens much like you would if you were, you know, back 20 years ago riding the bus. You know, one token for one ride. So what is a token? Well, that's unlimited deployments for unlimited applications for one organizational user on a machine per month. And we'll talk about what an organization is in a little bit. Basically, if you're not using it, you won't get charged. So if you've got a user that takes a month off, they won't do it. If a user's logging on from home and a personal computer, you know, like a personal computer and in the office, they might use 2 tokens. I'll point you to the website at the end, but this is kind of the tentative pricing I'm looking at, subject to change, probably not more than about 5 or maybe 10 cents. So this service is basically built on, I guess there's 2 main components. First is the service, which is built in Azure. I am using AWS for the emails, just because it worked better. So it's designed to be scalable and durable. One of the key takeaways is your deployment packages that you will put up in there are stored in an encrypted Azure blob container, and each organization has its own container. The second piece is the desktop client, which is a small kind of 20 megabyte file that'll run standalone. There is some advantages of running the installer, but that'll need to be on every user's computer. Eventually, I hope to put that into the Windows Store to make it simpler. And then the user will authenticate with a Microsoft or Azure Active Directory account. So trying to keep the administration piece to a minimum. And if you are set up as an admin for an organization, you can actually push out new versions directly from the client. So just to give you a little idea of kind of the topology of this, there's the service running on the cloud. We would install the client on a local user's machine. We use the OAuth 2 to validate who the user is and then send down a list of applications that the user has permissions to. When a user clicks on one of those applications, it will go see if it already has that same version of the file. If it does, it won't copy it down, but if it does need it, it'll copy it down. It then unzips all the files in that deployment package and will fire up access, and it will go ahead and connect, basically to your existing backend databases as is. That's kind of an important distinction. Your data doesn't live here. It's only the front end files. So your data needs to be kind of something accessible, whether it's a local SQL or Azure or maybe Dataverse that Maria talked about. So with that, that's enough kind of talking. Let me show you some demos. We're going to look at 3 different things. One is what the end user client experience is. And then I will show you how you can do the administration from the client. And then we will lastly look at the web setup piece for the configuration. So with that, I'm going to exit out of PowerPoint. And I'm going to go ahead and fire up the client. And what you'll notice here is it's prompting me to log in. You've probably seen this. This is the OAuth 2 implementation. So when I go ahead and click on this and hit continue, it'll log me in and connects to the service, and it pulls down a list of applications. So again, this experience is the end user. So you can see I have one application running here. And I want to call out that just notice this file here. I have one folder set up under this path. So I'm going to go ahead and launch an application. And boom, it fires up. And this takes a second because it's actually resetting the references from 32-bit to 64-bit. But that fired up. I know the libraries are there because my tree view is working. Now, what did this do? Well, if we drill into this organization, it copied down the zip file, which you can see has a library, an icon, and the actual database. And then it put them into this folder with the exact same layout. So basically it just pushes everything out. Now, it also updated the icon when they first launched to match that icon. Now, if I click on this again, you should notice it'll be significantly faster to bring up because A, it's not having to copy down the zip file anymore, and the references are already set. So I can skip that step the second time through. Another feature of this is you notice I've got this running minimized here. If I go ahead and click it again, it remembers the application that I launched previously. So it'll just go ahead and bring it to the foreground. A couple other things an end user can do. They can download and force an update. And this will basically ignore all the version checks. It'll always copy down the latest zip file and it'll always unstract it. So if a user gets themselves in a bad state, this is a way they can kind of do a self-service kind of reset and hopefully not involve you guys. And then the other thing they can do is actually create a desktop shortcut, which if you'll notice up here, it just created a shortcut in this corner. I'm actually going to exit the app launcher and I'm going to go ahead and double click on this. And you can see it's automatically firing up the service and it launches the application just like it did before. In fact, if I were to minimize that and launch it again, it just restores that application. The two code paths are exactly the same whether a user clicks on an application here or fires it off from here. Now, this allows you to kind of, customize it how they want to do it. Now, one thing you may have noticed is the second time I logged in, I wasn't prompted for who I was. That's part of the beauty of OAuth is it manages all those credentials and says, oh yeah, I've already approved you, go ahead and log in. In fact, the only time you're ever going to get prompted is if you log out explicitly or if I push out a new version of the front end. Okay, so that's the user experience. We can switch organizations, and I'm now an admin of this organization. And you can see I've got multiple applications, and I have the ability to create a new application, which I have a bug the first time you log in on Windows 11. It doesn't display correctly. So you can see this is what the configuration looks like. And I'm actually going to show you a different tenant or a different organization that has a few more applications. And let's look at, whoops, forgot to reset that. So here is an application that's already set up, and it may be hard to see in the presentation, but there's only 4 fields that are required. You have to give it a name. Display and tooltip are optional. You have to give it a deployment folder, which is going to map to the folder it will create under the organization. And then you have to upload a zip file. You can't set the file here. You basically upload it. It remembers the name that it copied to the blob storage. And then you give it what file you want to start. Now, it supports 32-bit and 64-bit, so it'll automatically detect which version it needs. So if you're pushing out a compiled application, you need to push out the correct bitness. So you would actually have to upload 2 different zip packages. And then we'll talk about some of the other settings in a second, especially this command here. You can also set the version of access. So this application was only going to run on 2010. So it won't launch if you find something lower than that. And then you can set a target version, which will explicitly use that version. So if I say you can only run on 365, it won't run if I have 2013 loaded. And then you can configure users here. I can simply add a user, or I could change the groups they belong to, and I can add groups. And the way things are set up, a user belongs to a group and applications belong to a group, and those intersections are what will show up down here. So let me go up a level or 2, and I'm going to go ahead and click on this instance here, which says this application must run from the launcher. let me close this, drill in, and just prove that. So it pops up and it says, hey, you can only run this application from the launcher, and it will go ahead and quit. Now, why is that important? That's the next thing I'll show you. We touched on it briefly about the maintenance message, but I'm going to actually close this down, and I'm going to start it again because there's a check that runs every 10 minutes, but I've short-circuited it to run every 2 minutes so I can show this demo. So let's say I have an application that I need to make a change to. I need to kick everybody out because I'm changing the schema. Oops. I can please get out now. I can set a maintenance message. I'm also going to take it out of runtime mode so we can look at how this bit of code works. So I'll go ahead and hit update and watch what happens over here. It says it's in maintenance mode and it kind of grayed out that button. Now, I'm an admin, so I can still launch this, but if I was a regular user and I tried to click on this, it won't let me launch that application. So I'm going to go ahead and launch it, spin it up in the background, and you can see I've taken it out of runtime mode so I can go in and look at the code. So we had talked about the application here, and here is the string that I'm passing in. So I've got that so I can compare them. I'm setting the application icon, and on startup, let me show you what this looks like. This is what I'm passing into the application. So here's the kind of application key that I'm passing in. I also pass in who the user is that was logging in and what their groups, whatever membership they belong to. So this would allow you to know who the user is from a level of, that matches OAuth. It also gives you the groups that they belong to, so you could loop through those and figure out what menus to show or not show. Okay, and perfect timing. My 2 minutes is up. This has now popped up a message with that same message we put in there, telling him it has to. That's interesting. Something didn't show up. They've got to get out. So a normal end user won't have the ability to cancel the shutdown only because I'm an admin. And what the shutdown here does is it basically sends a graceful quit to that application. So it's the same as clicking on the close button here. But what happens if a user has something where Access is going to prompt them, do they want to save it? Well, after the 60 seconds, it'll try again, and then it says, okay, I'll give you another 60 seconds. And if it can't close it there, it'll actually kill the process. So you can see my hands were off the keyboard, Access shut down gracefully. And now if I was an end user, I won't be able to get back in to this application. As an admin, I can go in and make my changes. I can go ahead and run this so I can test it out while it's still in maintenance mode. And then, when I'm happy, I can remove that from maintenance mode. So that's really the administration. There are a couple other things. You can actually run different EXEs or batch files or PowerShell scripts from here. Here's an example where I'm launching Excel. I'm not sure there's a great use case for this because it's going to, every time you're going to push it out. But maybe if it's a template, you could go ahead and push out a template. So it does support things other than Access, but Access is the primary focus. Okay, so the third demo is showing you the website. So I'll give you the URL and the slide deck, or I'll post it in the chat. But basically go to admin.appLauncher. It'll let you register an account. I would recommend using Microsoft to connect, because if you do this, you can use that same account to log into the client. You can create an account by giving a username and a password, but if you do that, it's going to be totally disconnected from the actual client. So I'm going to go ahead and log in with my Microsoft account. And there are 2 or 3 different levels depending on how you look. The first is a tenant, and a tenant is really just kind of a billing group. In most cases, you're only going to have one tenant. You will create organizations under that. When you purchase tokens, you will purchase them at the tenant level. So all your organizations will kind of consume that. So it's kind of an economies of scale thing. You can invite other people to administer your tenant. So let's say Carl wants me to do some work for him. He could say, okay, give Kevin admin rights for the tenant, so I could then create organizations. I won't be able to do the billing, or add tokens. So there's not much to the tenant level. When you drill down to the organization, you can see here's the organization that we were looking at earlier. I can give it a name, which is just an identifier for you. You can select different regions where your files are going to be stored, and I've set up a dozen throughout the world. This is important because of latency. So if you're in Europe, you probably want to pick a server in Europe, which will copy that zip file down quicker rather than using it in the States. And it supports a primary and a secondary. The secondary will only retrieve from there if there's a failure at the first. You also have the ability to log a machine name, which is important if you want to see which users are using which machines. If you don't select that, I will give you just a kind of a random machine identifier that you won't be able to point to which machine it is. And then you have the option of storing the user's full name or storing everything up to the @ sign. The last piece here is a way you can private label for each organization. So let's say Carl wanted to go ahead and brand this for DevCon. If I go ahead and save that, I can flip back to the client and watch the background. Watch the background here. If I go ahead and hit refresh, it has changed the background image, which you could make something that brands your company or your client's company. And if I try to close, it now says you're closing the DevCon app launcher, and I can point you to a custom web page. And then everything else is basically the same. We can access the same groups. We can add users from here. Applications, you can do most of the functionality. Let me go ahead and show you the edit screen here. So everything you can change with the exception of groups, just because I haven't wired that piece up. I need to figure out how to make the UI work. And I've not chosen specifically to allow you to upload a zip file from here. I'm not sure it makes a lot of sense because you're going to be presumably making the changes in Access, putting that into the zip file, and then re-uploading the zip file to push out a change. I could add this again. That's kind of the feedback. Doesn't make sense to ever use it from here. I think one of the important pieces is you could actually go in and set the maintenance message from your phone. So you could log into this application. You could set a maintenance message if you need to do something when you get back to the office. And within 12 minutes, you can pretty much guarantee everybody's out of the front end. So with that, I think I'm right on time.
Yeah, you're right on time. There would be a couple of questions, about 10 or 12, which we don't have the time to answer. We must postpone most of them to the feedback hour, I would say. You are here, aren't you?
Yep.
Yeah, so we'll postpone them. And I think, yeah, it's better. You're exactly on time. Yep. Let's ask the question and the discussion later.
Yep, sounds good.
Thank you very much, Kevin.
Thank you.
You get a lot of applause here.